why is the president involved in this feud with Senator Corker? Is there some concern on Capitol Hill that what you should be focused on is getting your agenda of tax reform through, and that petty feuds like this just distract from the bigger issues? So why is the president engaging in this?
Look, the president is focused on doing this. That's what he spent the majority of his day talking about. He went to the Hill and met with Republican senators to talk about tax reform, to push his legislative agenda. That's what he's spending a good bit of this week doing, and will continue doing next week until we get the job done.
But why does he engage like this?
Look, you've got an individual in the president. He's a fighter. We've said it many times before. The people of this country didn't elect somebody to be weak. They elected somebody to be strong. And when he gets hit, he's going to hit back. And I think Senator Corker knows that. And he's, maybe trying to get a headline or two on his way out the door.
So I understand that neither of these two senators we're talking about now have been allies, to say the least, of the president. But this has been an extraordinary series of attacks on the president from major figures in the Republican Party, not typical political attacks. I mean, saying that the president is responsible for the debasement of the nation, that a breakdown of civility is the fault of the president, and that enough is enough. We've seen similar remarks from John McCain, the party's former nominee. In any of this, does any of this make the president pause and wonder if he is doing anything wrong, that he bears any responsibility for what these senators are saying is a breakdown of civility in our country?
Look, I think the voters of these individual senator states are speaking in pretty loud volumes. I think that they were not likely to be reelected. And I think that shows that the support is more behind this president than it is those two individuals.
Why is there so little? Why is there so little pushback from other Republican senators on this? I mean, Mitch McConnell is the Republican leader. Bob Corker is still a committee chairman. Should there be?
Leader McConnell stood with the president just last week here at the White House and talked about how they were working together, how they were getting things done, how they were focused on actually moving the agenda forward. And so I think that's a pretty clear indication of where his support lies and what we're working to do.
If I could just pick up on what John was talking about. One of the criticisms from Senator Corker today was the idea that history will most remember President Trump for debasing the country. And you could hear in Senator Flake's remarks the idea that he seemed to be writing it for history. How do you think history will view not only the remarks of the two senators today, but also former President Bush last week?
I certainly think history is going to look at this president as somebody who helped defeat ISIS, who built an economy that was stronger than it's been in several decades, who brought unemployment to a 16-year low, who's created over 1.7 million jobs since being elected. I think those are the things that people actually care about, not some petty comments from Senator Corker and Senator Flake. And I think they're a lot more concerned about the big policy initiatives that this president is driving, including historic tax cuts, which we're going to get done by the end of this year, and then start focusing on some other things. Those are the things this president will be remembered by, and I think those are pretty good, certainly good facts, and ones that we're happy to stand on.
Sarah, thanks. To follow up on some of the questions that have been asked, how does fighting with members of his own party advance the president's agenda and his stated goals for the American people?
Look, the president is fighting for an agenda, and he has, as I've said, if he gets hit, he's going to hit back. And people didn't elect him to be weak. They elected him to be strong. And if he feels it's necessary to respond, he's going to do that. And at the same time, he can talk and chew gum at the same time. He's pushing forward on an agenda. It takes 30 seconds to send out a tweet, and he spends the bulk of his day working on and pushing policy initiatives like tax reform, like tax cuts, and that's what he is committed to doing.
There are two quick questions for you. You talked about the president's big policy initiatives, that'll be how history judges him. Obviously, so far right now, he has none that have made it through the legislative process on Capitol Hill. He wants to get taxes done. Bob Corker.
It's not true. No Gorsuch went through a legislative process. I would say that's a pretty big historical moment.
I don't know if that's a policy initiative.
Something that has a lasting legacy, probably far beyond most any other individual piece of legislation, is how the courts can shape and determine a lot of different things, and I think you'll see that in Justice Gorsuch.
So to finish that first question then, you talk about, when we talk about policy initiatives, like I'm thinking of healthcare or, for example, tax reform that have not been completed, at least not yet on Capitol Hill, the lack of support from somebody like Bob Corker might make that a lot more difficult. Given that, does the president feel like he's winning?
I think he feels like America's winning. I think if you look at some of the progress that's taken place in the first 9 months, despite the fact that the Congress has done very little up until this point, the president has gotten rid of nearly 1,000 regulations that have paved the way for massive job creation and job growth in this country. We're looking at a booming economy. I think those are things that people actually care about. We're looking at the defeat of ISIS, something that this president has led on and worked with our coalition forces to help do. He's created better relationships with countries around the globe. He's bolstered the relationship with NATO and had other countries encouraged in the growth of the amount of money that other countries are participating in that. The historic moment that we saw with the president on his first foreign trip when he was in Saudi Arabia and he spoke in front of nearly 60 Muslim majority countries. These are historic moments that he's done without Congress. Imagine how incredible and how many good things we would be doing if people like Senator Bob Corker got on board and started doing their job instead of doing so much grandstanding on TV.
The president believes, Sarah, that there should be, my second question, Sarah, given those comments, does the president believe there should be a loyalty test for Republican senators? Does he demand, you've mentioned several times.
I think that their loyalty should be to the American people and to the agenda that those people elected them to carry out.
Like say that is where their loyalty lies.
Well, I hope we'll see that in their votes.
Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Two questions.
Thanks.
Both Andrew.
You said before that Senator Flake and Senator Corker's comments were petty. What exactly of Senator Flake's speech did you find to be petty?
I thought that his attacks and a lot of the comments that he made, I don't have a readout in front of me, but as I was watching it, I noticed that a lot of the language I didn't think was befitting of the Senate floor.
Senators, why does the White House and the President specifically continue to say that Senator Bob Corker helped President Obama on the Iran deal when the facts clearly say that's not true?
Actually, the facts do say that it's true. It was Senator Corker who wrote the INARA legislation that legitimized the Iran nuclear deal. Despite lacking the votes to ratify the flawed Iran deal as a treaty in the Senate, Corker's bill rolled out the red carpet for the Obama administration, gaining congressional approval without the necessary votes. He may not have voted for it, but he certainly helped make it happen.
But he didn't vote for it.
But
I mean,
he
the Washington
helped allow
Post has
it to
given
take
4
place.
Pinocchios on this. If you look through
And
it,
as I've
Senator
said many
Corker
times
says it's a
before, I
lie.
wouldn't
Why
use the Washington Post as my source, Jeff. You
Exactly,
should know
but
better
this
than
is
that.
true. When you go back and look through
Jeff
this, the
Mason.
White House clearly is not telling the truth on this. Why does the
Actually,
President continue to say that he helped President Obama with it?
Because
it's just not
he
true.
did.
He voted against it, though, Sarah.
He voted against it, but he allowed it to happen. He put it in motion. He rolled out the red carpet, and he made it possible for it to move forward. That is a fact, and that is true.
Sarah, thank you. One of the aspects of civil discourse is for people in the discussion to acknowledge when they've made misstatements. And there's a pattern in this White House and with the President that when they make misstatements, those are not corrected. For example, the Chief of Staff came out here at this podium and mischaracterized a speech by a congresswoman given at an FBI building dedication. Why won't the Chief of Staff, or you right now, acknowledge that that was a mischaracterization and correct the record?
I don't believe that General Kelly mischaracterized. He gave his account of what took place. General Kelly and his family have made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. I think he's led with honor and integrity. I think he's doing a great job of Chief of Staff, and I don't think he has anything to correct or apologize for.
Just to follow up
Hallie.
on that, why wouldn't, even if President Trump meant to console the widow of Sergeant Johnson, why hasn't he or anyone from the White House apologized for how she took his call? She took his call as insensitive.
Look, the president was making the point that his call was meant to be respectful, sympathetic, and the purpose was to offer condolences on behalf of the nation.
Thanks, Sarah. On the opioid crisis, we've seen the president organize a commission. We've seen him host meetings. He's used the word crippling, the words national emergency. We've seen the administration put more resources into law enforcement. And we've seen him take on this message of telling kids just not to start. But advocates for those who are addicted say they feel like they just haven't seen enough work towards helping people who are currently addicted, that there is a need for a huge rush of money to get more people into treatment. What's the president thinking right now, and can they expect anything in the coming days when it comes to getting help to those who are addicted and need treatment?
Absolutely. This is obviously a growing epidemic that the president is very committed to fighting against. He has been working with his policy advisors and his team diligently and all of the relevant components and agencies, and you'll see some more details on those efforts by the end of this week. And in the next couple of days, some specific announcements that the president said he would have. Thanks so much, guys. We'll be around the rest of the afternoon to answer any follow-up questions. Have a good day.
Sarah, why hasn't the president implemented the Russia sanctions?
Thanks, Sarah. Let's go to the president's tweet this morning, if we can. What proof does President Trump have when he says Congresswoman Wilson is not telling the truth? Are there recordings of his phone call with Maisha Johnson?
No, but there were several people in the room from the administration that were on the call, including the Chief of Staff, General John Kelly.
The president also said that he has called every family of someone who's died. Is that true?
The president's made contact with all of the families that have been presented to him through the White House Military Office.
There have been families that have since come forward in this to the Associated Press. Their names are in these reports who say they've not actually heard from this White House in any capacity.
All of the individuals that the president has been presented with through the proper protocol have been contacted through that process.
What exactly is the president denying? Is he denying that he ever spoke these words to the widow, that that he must have known what he signed up for, or is he just saying that she took it the wrong way and it was taken out of context, his words?
The president's call, as accounted by multiple people in the room, believed that the president was completely respectful, very sympathetic, and expressed the condolences of himself and the rest of the country, and thanked the family for their service, commended them for having an American hero in their family, and I don't know how you could take that any other way.
It wasn't that he didn't say those words, it was that the context. He felt that she put it in the wrong context. Is that it?
I'm not going to get into the back and forth. I think that the sentiment of the president was very clear. He took the time to make a call to express his condolences, to thank the family for this individual's service, and I think it frankly is a disgrace of the media to try to portray an act of kindness like that and that gesture and to try to make it into something that it isn't. Peter.
Sarah, did the president speak to his Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, before invoking his son's death and what has become a political argument?
I know he's spoken to General Kelly multiple times yesterday and today.
On this very topic, in other words, did General Kelly know he would be raising the issue of his son's memory when talking about
I'm not sure
if
he knew of that specific comment, but they had certainly spoken about it, and he's aware, and they've spoken several times since then.
So can you describe how General Kelly feels about it? Is he comfortable with the way his son's memory has been?
I think that General Kelly is disgusted by the way that this has been politicized, and that the focus has become on the process and not the fact that American lives were lost. I think he's disgusted and frustrated by that. If he has any anger, it's towards that.
Sarah.
April.
Sarah, Congresswoman Wilson, I talked to her a couple of hours ago, and she says that this is the president's Benghazi. She says that that Jackson was, and the Green Berets were in Niger trying to find out information and doing a mission about Boko Haram. And she said that his transmitter was still emitting for 2 days, emitting a signal when he was located. And she says that makes no sense why he wasn't located. What say you about that? And also, what do you say about her comment that he did not know, and the wife, the widow, said that the president did not know his name? He kept saying, "Your God, your God."
Just because the president said your guy, I don't think that means that he doesn't know his name. As the president stated, the hardest job he has is making calls like that. I think it is appalling what the Congresswoman has done and the way that she's politicized this issue and the way that she is trying to make this about something that it isn't. This was a president who loves our country very much, who has the greatest level of respect for men and women in the uniform, and wanted to call and offer condolences to the family. And I think to try to create something from that the Congresswoman is doing is frankly appalling and disgusting.
What she said about Boko Haram and Niger. What did you say about what she said about the mission and then comparing
As I said to Major
Benghazi?
before, I'm not going to get into the details of that action at this point.
Was she right?
As I said before, I'm not going to get into the details of that action at this time, and when we have further information, I'll be happy to discuss it with you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Pally.
Thank you. I just want to, setting aside the Congresswoman, setting aside the discussion about the politicization of this, the woman who raised Sergeant Johnson spoke to the Washington Post and said she felt like her son had been disrespected. And again, I'm not asking about what Congresswoman Wilson had to say, I'm not asking about any of that, but given that somebody who has, as you rightly note, making these phone calls is probably one of the hardest things a Commander-in-Chief has to do. Given that, is the President at all reconsidering the way that he communicates with these families? Has General Kelly counseled him on perhaps how he might want to choose or change his words in the future?
General Kelly was present for the call and thought it was completely appropriate. He thought the call was respectful, and he thought that the President did the best job he could under those circumstances to offer condolences on behalf of the country.
And was empathetic enough, Sarah? Was there part, is that
On
part of it?
NAFTA, the Canadian and the Mexican negotiators have rejected the U.S. proposals that were described as unconventional and troubling. Is NAFTA dead?
Not yet, but as the President said, it's a bad deal, and he wants to make sure that we have a deal that benefits American workers. That's what this administration is focused on. We're going to continue to push forward, and if we can't get there, then we'll let you know what the changes are. Francesca?
Thank you, Sarah. In a tweet this morning, President Trump said that former FBI Director James Comey lied, leaked, and totally protected Hillary Clinton. He also asked, where is the Justice Department on this? What exactly does the President want the Justice Department to do? Is he calling for a prosecution of James Comey? What's he asking for here?
Look, the White House hasn't and won't offer a legal opinion on Comey's conduct. But in fact, to the contrary, the White House has actually deferred, as it should, any and all legal questions regarding Director Comey to the Department of Justice. That's the appropriate venue for those things to be dealt with.
What's he asking the Department of Justice to do, though, in his tweet this morning? That's what I'm asking.
We refer any legal action to the Department of Justice. Anything on that front would be handled by them. Sarah?
Sarah, normally when the President is upset about something, we hear from him pretty quickly about it, whether it's an issue with the Senator, whether it's an issue with the NFL. So why did it take nearly 2 weeks for him to say something about this ISIS ambush? Not to reach out for the families necessarily, but even to offer public condolences or to explain to the American public what happened and how the deadliest combat mission involving American troops went so wrong.
As I said before, there is a protocol for that, but there's also, we did make public remarks from the administration. I know I did in short order after that happened from the podium at the direction of the President, and I speak on his behalf, and I did that on behalf of the President and the administration.
Sarah, you brought up politicizing a couple of times in relation to Congresswoman Wilson, but did the President politicize General Kelly's son's death by bringing it up as a defense for his claims about what past presidents did or did not do with
He was responding to a question and stating a fact.
Just to clarify your earlier answer, you're not denying that in some point in the conversations the President used the words, "it's what he signed up for"?
I spoke specifically to the sentiment that was offered by the President, and I didn't get into the details of a personal call because I don't find that to be that appropriate.
Sarah, thanks. Does the President feel as a matter of principle that it is not adequate to simply send a letter of condolence to the family of a slain service person, as President Bush and President Obama typically did? And does he feel that it was not adequate for President Obama to have sent a letter to General Kelly but not called General Kelly on the death of his son?
I don't think that there's anything that any president can do. There's never going to be enough that a president can do for the families of those that are killed in action. The point the President was making is that there's a different process. Sometimes they call, sometimes they write letters, sometimes they engage directly. The comments were certainly, I think, taken very far out of context by the media, and if there's any frustration, I think that's where it should be focused. John Decker.
Thank you, Sarah. A question about the NFL. Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, earlier today said that all players should stand during the playing of the national anthem. Earlier this week, there was no change in policy as it relates to the NFL mandating that all players in the NFL stand for the national anthem. Does the president believe that he's winning this argument or has won this argument as it relates to what he said about whether players should stand for the playing of the national anthem?
I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. As we've said many times before, the president supports standing for the national anthem, saluting the flag, and honoring those men and women in uniform that fight to protect it. Trey?
Thank you, Sarah. You opened up at the top discussing the liberation of Raqqa. So my question for you is, how does the president envision future U.S. involvement in both Syria and Iraq post-ISIS?
We want to continue to work with our coalition forces to completely destroy and defeat ISIS. Right now, that's the priority, and that's the focus, and that's what we're going to continue to be focused on at this time. Thank you guys so much for today, and see you tomorrow. Jim.
Sir, why did the president tweet this morning that he'd like to see the Senate Intelligence Committee investigate news outlets and I guess this quest to go after fake news? Does he value the First Amendment as much as he values the Second Amendment?
Absolutely. The president is a incredible advocate of the First Amendment. But with the First Amendment, you have, hold on, I allowed you to finish. With the First Amendment, with those freedoms also come responsibilities. And you have a responsibility to tell the truth, to be accurate. I think right now, when we've seen recent information that says that only 5% of media coverage has been positive about this president and this administration, while at the same time you have the stock market and economic confidence at an all-time high. ISIS is on the run. Unemployment's at the lowest it's been in 17 years. We've cut regulations at a historic pace. We're fixing the VA for our vets. You've only found 5% of your time to focus on some of those big issues, and frankly, those are the issues most Americans care about. Not a lot of the things that you cover, not a lot of the petty palace intrigue that you spend your time on. I think that we need to move towards a certainly more fair, more accurate, and frankly, a more responsible news media for the American people.
May I follow, Sarah, if I could follow up on that.
Sorry, I'm going to try to get to everybody, and like I told your colleague, if I have time.
Very quickly though, should Congress investigate news outlets?
No. Hold on, I'm going to try to get to everybody
Sarah,
today.
thank you. Sarah, was the president upset that his Secretary of State didn't deny calling him a moron in his public remarks yesterday?
Look, as the Secretary of State said, this is a petty, ridiculous accusation, and frankly, I think it's beneath the Secretary of State to weigh in on every rumor out there. His spokesperson, however, did come out and clarified that the Secretary of State had never used those words.
What's your response to those who say the president has undercut the Secretary of State? Sarah, just quickly before you move on.
I think it's the premise of that question is absolutely ridiculous. The president can't undercut his own cabinet. The president is the leader of the cabinet. He sets the tone, he sets the agenda, and I think that question makes no sense because of that. David?
Just one for you. We now know that Secretary Price was essentially let go for his private jet travel, and we know that I think in close proximity to his firing, Secretary Perry took a private jet. We know that Kellyanne Conway was along for one of Secretary Price's rides. At the same time, the president has now spent, I think, 17 weekends at taxpayer expense for the flights, either at Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster, at the cost of $180,000 an hour for Air Force One, and is going to take the plane to a fundraiser in North Carolina this weekend. So here's the question. Is he not setting the tone that tells his cabinet members that this kind of misuse of taxpayer money, or overuse, if you will, is okay?
I'll start with North Carolina. My understanding is that for a political event that'll be reimbursed for any political travel. The president is
the first class rate that Secretary Price paid that.
I'd have to check on that, but the president is in a certainly very different position. He's not allowed to travel in a different way other than in a secure airplane as Air Force One.
Every weekend, does he? I mean, he could stay here and work like the former
president. The president
did.
certainly hasn't been there every weekend, and every weekend that he's traveling, no matter where he is, the president is working. He's hosted foreign leaders on several of those trips, which have led to some great great accomplishments. They've led certainly to putting further pressure, unprecedented pressure on North Korea, in large part because of the relationship development that's taken place at some of those weekends that you're attacking for. This is a president that is committed to helping move his agenda forward, and certainly I think that those weekends have been very successful in doing that. Alex?
I want to ask about the president's tweet this morning about the Senate Intelligence Committee. Is he frustrated with how long the investigation into alleged Russian election interference is taking?
I think more importantly than the president being frustrated, I think the American people are frustrated. The Senate Intel Committee told us yesterday that after nearly 9 months of investigated, that's included more than 100 interviews over more than 250 hours, 4,000 pages of transcripts, 100,000 pages of documents, interviewing officials in the intelligence community who wrote the report on Russian election meddling, interviewing relevant Obama administration officials, and talking to every Trump campaign official they've requested. It's literally found zero evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. I think that the American people would like them to focus on some other things. I know that we certainly have said this all along, and we're glad that as they continue this process, they're coming to the same conclusion. Trey?
Sarah, does President Trump believe the Senate Intelligence Committee should investigate American media organizations?
I don't know that that's the case, but I do think that we should call on all media to a higher standard, and certainly I think I weighed in very clearly what our position is when Jim asked a question earlier.
Intelligence Committee looking into the fake news networks in our country.
Look, I think that you have a lot of responsibility, and a lot of times false narratives create a bad environment, certainly aren't helpful to the American people, and you have a responsibility to provide and report fair and accurate details, and when we don't, that's, I think, troubling for all of us.
Sarah, you've said several times that the White House wants to be part of the conversation on bump stocks. The president said himself this week, we'll be talking about gun laws as time goes by, but you also suggested, I think, and just to clear it up, that the time to talk about that is after the investigation has gotten to another stage or wrapped up? I mean, if not now, when is it appropriate to start having this conversation about policy?
I haven't said that the investigation has to be fully complete before conversations can take place, but I think we have to be careful that before we go out and try to talk about things that prevented something, we need to know what caused it in the first place, and we're not there yet. We're still in that process. We certainly want to, again, look at every way that we could prevent anything even remotely close to this from ever happening again, and we want to be part of that process, and we hope to. April?
Sarah, over the last couple of days, the president has used the word fear, hate, and cruelty. And since you're saying you're having conversations on different things as it relates to Las Vegas, what is the conversation when it comes to the issue of terror? You've not talked about it yet. You've not classified it as such. And talking to people from both sides of the aisle, they're saying there's no one settled or universal definition for terrorism, but we've seen Timothy McVeigh with Oklahoma City. We've seen Ruff with Mother Emanuel in Charleston. I mean, under all circumstances that we've seen so far, people were intimidated, scared, ambushed, military style, in a planned, thought out effort, be it whether it's political or not. They were terrorized. Is this administration willing to start, since they're having conversations about other things, was this terror, domestic terror?
I think that's something for the law enforcement communities to define and identify. I think the bigger thing that this administration certainly has been focused on is the prevention and looking at how we can stop things like this from ever happening again. I don't care how you label it, it's something that should never take place in this country, and this president is committed to looking for ways to prevent it. Hallie?
What about that shirt?
Sorry, I've limited everybody to one question today.
Had that shirt saying nasty. What does this White House believe? The president went there. It was very controversial, his appearance
Actually,
there.
it wasn't controversial.
Well, some people
it was actually widely praised even by a Democrat governor. I think that it is sad that the mayor of San Juan chose to make that a political statement instead of a time of focusing on the relief efforts. The president invited her to be part of that conversation. He specifically asked in the meeting where many were present, including a couple dozen other other mayors who were very happy with the recovery efforts, the governor, the congresswoman. He opened the floor up for discussion, and she actually made zero comments. To me, that would have been the time and the place that she should have weighed in and asked for what she needed and laid out what she was asking for San Juan. She didn't. Instead, she chose to wait until the president left and then criticize him on TV, which I think is the wrong thing for her to do for her constituents. And I hope next time she's given the opportunity to help her constituents, she'll take it. Hallie.
I have a question for you. You've made very clear that the president is open to the conversation surrounding bump stocks and perhaps other regulations on gun control. Does he want to lead that conversation? Will he get out and use the power of his presidential platform to push for more regulation on, for example, bump stocks, which law enforcement officials have said were used in Vegas?
I think right now the position of the president has been to lead on the effort of uniting our country. We've had a country in mourning, and I think we saw what kind of leader this president wanted to be by what he did yesterday. He went in, he met with the law enforcement officials, he met with the medical teams, he met with the survivors of that horrific tragedy. Obviously, this president wants to be a leader. I think he's demonstrated that. I think he'll continue to do that in this process. If you want me to get down into the weeds on specific policy, I don't think we're there yet. Right now, we want to lead the effort on bringing our country together and offering comfort to those that have been hurt over the last several days. Mike. Sorry, again, I'm going to take this the last one, Mike.
There's some talk that some of the main facilitators of the Iran nuclear deal are significant contenders for the Nobel Peace Prize. Is the White House aware of that, and do you have a thought on these folks being talked about as potential winners?
I'm not sure about the Nobel Peace Prize process, and certainly not as it pertains to that, but I think we've been very clear what our position is on the deal. That hasn't changed just because some people may receive an award for it. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good day.
Sarah, you said no on Congress investigating news outlets, right?